Welcome back, you little speed freaks, to F1 Brake Check. This is the podcast of oddball insights and even odder standards. On today's edition, we will have a recap of all the news, rumors, and action from the Styria region and the Red Bull Ring. So stick around while we unleash the chaos that is F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
We are back with F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. I am one of your intrepid hosts, and with me, as always, is my pundit for life, my brother in arms, my ride or die, Corey Broom. Corey, how you doing this week, sir?
Good. Took the week off, so it's even better.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, we are recording on Wednesday, July the 2nd and the 4th. On Friday is a holiday here in the United States. And so Corey was nice enough to take the whole week off. So good for you, buddy.
Right on. Right on. How about you? How's your week been?
It's been chaos as usual, busy, busy, busy. Now looks like I'm going to have to do some traveling at the end of the month. So, trying to book all that and get it all ready to go. So, and get ready for those meetings. So just tons and tons of fun.
Yeah.
Said no one ever.
Right.
All right. So shall we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Nestled in the lush green hills of the Styria countryside, where cows graze peacefully and the echoes of turbocharged V6s bounce off the pine-covered slopes, lies a temple of speed and simplicity. It is short, sharp, brutal, and beautiful. This is the Red Bull Ring, once known as the Österreich Ring and the stage for the Austrian Grand Prix, a track that asks a simple question of drivers: how brave are you, really? Let's take a high-octane journey through the asphalt ribbon that is the Austrian Grand Prix, its layout, its rhythm, its infamous flashpoints, and its place as one of modern Formula One's most thrilling battlegrounds. Today's Austrian Grand Prix is contested on the modernized version of the Österreich Ring, rebranded as the Red Bull Ring after a 2003 purchase and heavy investment by, well, Red Bull. But don't let the branding fool you. The circuit remains a beast. Deceptively simple on paper, yet ferocious in practice. At just 4.3 kilometers or 2.6 miles, it's one of the shortest tracks on the calendar, yet what it lacks in length, it makes up for intensity. A lap here is a breathless 70 seconds of commitment, 10 corners, 3 DRS zones, 3 brutal uphill straights, and elevation changes that can make a roller coaster jealous. Turn 1. Niki Lauda curve, named in honor of Austria's greatest racing son. This uphill right-hander punishes poor exits. Nail it or suffer all the way up to turn 3. Turn 3, Remus. Technically, turn 2 is a kink, but Remus is the hairpin that really matters. Heavy braking, big dive bombs, even bigger drama. Turn 4, downhill, full commitment. You're carrying speed. The rear is twitchy, and everyone is side by side on lap 1. You're either a hero or you're in the gravel. The middle sector flows, but still offers overtaking. The final corners, a high-speed slingshot through Rent, back onto the main straightaway, begging you to go just a little too wide and invalidate your lap. It's fast, it's ruthless, it's where milliseconds and milliseconds alone separate glory from agony. Since its return to the calendar in 2014, the Austrian Grand Prix has become a highlight of the season, not least because of the drama it often unleashes. Let's rewind to 2016, when Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg, already locked in a civil war at Mercedes, collided on the final lap. Hamilton came through to win. Rosberg limped home with a broken wing. Toto Wolff slammed his fist on the desk. The tension, thick as a brick. The aftermath, nuclear. Or how about 2019, when a young Max Verstappen, after a terrible start that dropped him to 7th, stormed back through the field, hunted down Charles Leclerc, and passed him with elbows firmly out in turn 3, just laps from the finish. Controversial? Yes. Spectacular? Absolutely. It was a signature Verstappen moment. Hard, uncompromising, and unforgettable. Then came the doubleheaders of 2020 and 2021 when the pandemic turned the Styrian Hills into a Formula One summer camp. 2 back-to-back weekends when teams returned to Spielberg and gave us everything from first lap pileups to Lando Norris sticking it on the podium, to George Russell nearly grabbing his first Williams points until he didn't. And let's not forget 2022, when track limits became the story. Nearly half the grid racked up penalties. Qualifying laps were deleted with reckless abandon, and drivers fumed. At one point, it felt like the race stewards were the ones battling for pole position. Since Red Bull's rise, the team has treated this race like a royal coronation. The orange sea of Dutch fans, the Dutch army, descends on the hills like a Formula One Woodstock, and Max has delivered 4 victories since 2018. But don't let the stats fool you. This place can bite. Engines overheat, tires blister, and the race has a tendency to turn chaotic right when you least expect it. It's the unpredictability married to the clarity of the layout that makes Austria so consistently entertaining. While the old Österreich-Ring of the 1970s and 80s was a high-speed, highly dangerous thrill ride, today's Red Bull pays homage to that spirit while embracing modern safety and spectacle, and it delivers year after year. It's a track where drivers can't hide behind complex corners or endless straights. It's just raw talent, wheel-to-wheel combat, and the willingness to break a few meters later than the person beside you. As Formula One continues to expand into new territories and mega circuits, Austria stands out as something of a purist dream, a no-nonsense track that gives the racing we actually want, short, savage, and sensational. So when the circus rolls into Spielberg each year, it's not just another stop on the calendar. It's a showdown in the mountains. The brakes will glow, the engines will scream, and if recent history has taught us anything, you should never, ever bet on a boring Austrian Grand Prix.
I really, really enjoy. I think that it's, not only from a technical aspect, but I don't know. It's just one of those that it never just the action. There's always something happening, even in the midfield.
Yes.
Typically that's where we see a lot of the action actually happening. Like this last race. We'll get into it here in just a few minutes, but we see a lot of the action really happening towards the middle of the pack versus really at the top. The top, usually you don't see them except for the very beginning. And then it's out after that.
Now, because like I said, in the history, there's been times where, in the closing laps, there's been a lot of drama there as well, right at the sharp end of the grid. You've got Verstappen's overtake of Leclerc. That is definitely light real material. You have the collision between Hamilton and Rosberg, which really was they were already really at each other's throats already. And then when that collision happened, oh my God! That was really in a lot of ways that's kind of what fractured that relationship to the point where basically the two, Rosberg and Hamilton didn't speak to each other for years afterwards.
Right.
So, this is a track that always brings the drama. And, again, like a lot of the tracks, I've never driven it in real life, but I've driven, literally hours and hours on the sim on this track. And I love this track. It is, from a first look, it doesn't look like it's a terribly technical track, but you have to be pinpoint precise on this track or you're going to be in trouble. And if you get one corner wrong, then you're fighting for 3 or 4 corners to get back up to proper velocity.
Yep.
It is so hard. If you miss one corner, it is so hard to get back on track, during a lap and everything. And it is so much fun.
Yeah. As a fan, it's definitely fun to watch as well.
Yeah. Exactly. And you throw it, and then if the weather all of a sudden, if the inclement weather there in the mountains suddenly changes, oh my God, you've got a whole new wrinkle of that gets thrown in. And it's an amazing track. I'm so happy that we've got it on the calendar. Yeah. All right. So once again, our Stump the Pundit section is going to have to take another week off. Multiple reasons. We're not going to get into them right now. So let's go ahead and jump into the news, rumors, and all the other news that's unworthy of being printed out, as they say. So first of all, let's recap the race from the last weekend. So first of all, because it wasn't a sprint weekend like it has been in the last couple of years, this was a normal Grand Prix weekend. So we actually got the running of a couple of rookies during FP1. So we got to see Alex Dune take Lando's place at McLaren. And we also got, and I'm going to apologize for mispronouncing this because I've been practicing all day and I still can't get it right. Dino Beganovic. Actually, I think I got it right that time. Also took and got his first outing in a Ferrari. Dunn really acquitted himself very, very well. If you look at the speed times from FP1, he was only like a tenth of a second off of Oscar's time in the McLaren, so he looked really good. Now, Dino, on the other hand, he was way down on the charts and everything, but from what I understand, and is that Dune has had a little more time in the simulator and in older machinery that Dino has not had at Ferrari. So, but it still was kind of interesting to get to see the rookies, take to the track this week.
Yeah, that way, so Red Bull can find and draft their next driver. I'm being sarcastic.
It's funny that you say that because we did get the news that there was rumors that Lindblad might get to run this weekend, but it has been confirmed by Red Bull that he will be taking Max's seat during FP1 this coming weekend at Silverstone. So we're going to get to actually see a head-to-head comparison between Arvid Lindblad and Yuki Tsunoda. And this is going to be really interesting to watch. That's providing that there's no like drama or mechanical issues or anything. We're going to get to see a direct comparison. And if Lindblad looks just as, I don't want to say mediocre, but if he and Yuki's times are very similar, then we are going to unequivocally have the proof that that we've all long suspected, is that there is not another human being other than Max Verstappen on this planet who can drive that second Red Bull.
Yeah, you and I talked about this before, but my thinking is this is a problem. So on one-offs, drivers look good in that car. Yuki looked good in that car. Daniel Ricciardo looked good in that car. One late race lap, his times weren't very far off from Max. So going through one iteration or one free practice, I don't think is quite enough to say Yuki sucks or Yuki's good or whatever. We all know where the problem is. We all know the problem is with the car. But just like Ferrari, they won't be honest with themselves and take a very hard look at themselves and say, this is a problem. And maybe they need to hire the engineer from F1, the movie.
Maybe so. Maybe so, but I'm very excited to see how Lindblad gets on this weekend when he's given his first opportunity in the modern. We know that he's already driven an older AlphaTauri. We know that he's already been in the simulator a bunch, but it's going to be it's going to be really exciting to finally see if this phenom, as a lot of the people in the paddock are calling him, to finally get behind the wheel of a modern Formula One car and see how he goes.
Because for me, at least, it'll be my first time actually seeing him in an F1 car and actually racing in general, F1 car or not. I haven't seen him race. So it'll be really interesting to see as much push as Red Bull is putting behind him, what that push is all about. And generally, their driver selection is pretty stellar. So it's going to be exciting to see what this kid has behind him. So I'm really excited. Absolutely. But, again, I still firmly believe that Yuki is the best person for that seat. And for them to change out, I think it's just a detriment to their own chances. I think that they just need to do a lot more work with that car versus changing out drivers. Because, seriously, when does it end?
Yeah. No, I
we've
totally
had so
agree
many
with
talented drivers in that seat. It's insane to me that you would change out yet another driver because you're not unwilling to look at the car.
Yeah, I really don't see them. Unless he is unless Lindblad gets in the car and he's like a second and a half faster than Yuki throughout the entire FP. I mean, one lap aside, if he's like consistently, a second and a half, 2 seconds faster than Yuki, which I highly doubt is going to happen, I can see them maybe start thinking about it, that if Yuki's form doesn't turn around, that maybe by the end of the European season or by the end of the summer break, they might look at bringing in Lindblad, as a
Still a
replacement
mistake.
for him. But I still think
Yeah,
that would be a huge mistake. I
totally
still
agree.
think that they should let Yuki continue out and at least finish out the year, and and give Lindblad a little more time to get acclimated to the pressures of Formula One.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I don't. Anyway, I won't go down that road. I'll just cut it there.
Okay. So, one of our winners from this weekend, of course, is our race winner in Lando Norris. And McLaren once again came home 1-2. But we had another really spirited battle between Lando and Oscar. Oscar looked really quick all weekend long. I mean, but they battled hard, especially in the opening laps. But they kept it clean. It's
For the
like,
most part.
for them, well, I mean, neither one of them is, what they both finished.
Yes.
They both, relatively unscathed. For all intents and purposes, it was a clean battle between the two of them.
Right.
It was like Oscar was fighting hard. There was several times where he looked like he may have had him, but Lando stayed calm, cool, and collected, and ended up bringing it home in one piece and bringing it home in first place.
Yeah. So I don't know what's happened to Lando recently. So I'm not going to say any conspiracy theories like he actually died in a motorcycle accident and they replaced him with a cyborg. I'm not going to say that. But whoever this new Lando Norris is, I'm liking what he's doing.
I am too.
Much more confident. He's much more aggressive. He's not taking a passive seat. And he's looking like the number one driver now.
Yeah,
Love
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because he was on not a good trajectory even 4 races ago.
Yes.
He's looking much, much better, much more confident.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, we saw that in Canada, even though the overtake move was a little too over.
I'm okay with that, though.
Exactly. I am too. I am completely okay with it. He did what he needed to do, and it didn't work out. Sometimes that's what happens in racing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So, and usually, often when it doesn't, it bites you.
Yeah, but if you never take that chance, you will never be up there. So you have to take that chance. Love that.
Just like the old Senna quote: "If you don't go for the gap, you're no longer a racing driver."
Yeah, exactly.
So he did what he needed to do. So kudos on Lando. So and kudos on McLaren. They just had another phenomenal season to go along with everything else that they've already done. So I don't know how many more superlatives we can take and we can heap on these guys right now. On the flip side of how good McLaren looked and how good of a battle we got between Lando and Oscar, we had, well, first of all, we had a number of streaks came to an end when Kimi Antonelli, little too over, the braking happened going into turn 1 a little quicker than what he had anticipated, and he ends up slamming into the side of Max Verstappen, takes both himself and Max out of the race. So we had the end of the Max's point scoring streak.
Yeah.
Also, we had the end of Max's race finishing streak. And we also, because Yuki, and we'll get into Yuki's problems here in a few minutes, but because of Yuki's finishing position, it also ended Red Bull's point scoring streak.
Yeah,
so let's talk about Max and Kimi's coming together first.
Yeah. Max's streak was what, 31 races consecutive?
Yes.
And that's at an end now. It's like Max said in the interview, he doesn't fault Kimi at all. It was a racing accident. Stuff happens when you're that close. Things happen, and I'm really happy because Max could have been a complete raging person on Kimi and just could have lit him on fire, but he didn't. He took the high road and
No,
said, you know what? Hey, things happen. It's all right. No big deal. Maybe because he's
and
going to be his teammate next year.
maybe very, very well so. But the other thing that I really liked was the fact that Kimmy immediately got out
Yes.
of the car, as he and Max are walking up the hill away from the cars towards towards the fencing. Even Kimmy was like, he's trying to explain to Max, he goes, I goofed up. He owned up to it. He owned everything about it, said it was my mistake. And, for all intents and purposes, this is really only the second big mistake he's made
Yeah.
as a rookie. So, and like you said, it was a racing incident. He just took and he was carrying too much speed. He locked it up. And at that point, he was more or less a passenger anyway. There wasn't really much he could have done because Formula One cars that when they have a lockup,
Yeah.
it's really hard to gather that car back up. And like you said, because they were, everybody at the start of the race is so close together
Yeah.
that there really wasn't a whole lot he could do,
Right.
at that point. And it just so happened to, he took Max out, but it was like you said, it was a racing incident. It's one of those things that's going to happen. I don't care if you're Max Verstappen or if you're, Lance Stroll,
Yeah.
stuff like that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Once Max went out, then that left Yuki as the lone Red Bull,
Driver.
the lone hope for Red Bull, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But the fact that Yuki had a very poor qualified 18th, and then he takes and he has an incident during the race, which takes and gets him a 10-second penalty, which relegates him to I believe it was 18th is where he ended up finishing. I'm looking at the
because
stats right
4
now.
went out, right?
Yes, you're right. So he ends up finishing 16th, but he's still out of the points, and that still ends Red Bull's 200 and I don't have the number in front of me, but it was 200 and something consecutive point scoring races in which they'd scored points and ended up killing that. So, Yuki winds up, 2 laps down. Just a pretty disastrous weekend all the way around for Red Bull.
Right. Yeah. But again, it's frustrating because I honestly think that I don't know. What's your opinion on this? Do you think it's time for Horner to step aside?
No, I do not. I think that right now this happens to every team. I don't care who they are, how world class they are. There are going to be times where they're going to hit a rough patch. Now, whether that rough patch is 2 or 3 races and they get over it and then they're right back on form, or if it's, like in the case of like say a Williams or an Alpine where now all of a sudden 1 or 2 races becomes perpetual and they start that, slow and sometimes even, very quick decline into mediocrity or worse. Now, the thing is, though, is that, like I said, because you can't fault Max because, he was taken out by Antonelli. Also, he had some really bad luck during Q3. They threw that yellow flag at the wrong time. If they had thrown it like, I saw somebody else say, if they had thrown it like 4 or 5 seconds later, Max would have qualified higher on the weekend during Q3, and he wouldn't have been anywhere near Kimmy, and chances were probably pretty good that he would have finished much better in the race. So no, I don't think it's any problem with Horner right now. Now I'm going to reserve that by saying, ask me again in 3 races. If they're still looking this bad after 2 or 3 more races, then I'll say that yes, maybe it is time for a regime change at Red Bull.
Right. You're much nicer than I am. I think I've thought that it's been time for him to leave for honestly since the beginning of the season. Once I saw that the problems that Lawson was having with the car, and I truly believe it was, even with Lawson, I truly believe it was the car. It was not Lawson. Even Lawson was talking about that. So at the very beginning of the season, I've been thinking for a while now, it's time. He's made some great moves while Christian was here, or he's still here, obviously, but I do think it's time for him to go. So you're much
Okay.
nicer and more forgiving than I am.
The only reason why I am, I am a little more forgiving is because that's, it's one of those things that, he's been there for so
Yep.
long. And, he was the architect of, 8 drivers' championships that, it's one of those things that, if it were someone who was, relatively new and he was still and he made a few of these mistakes that maybe, it's like the more successful you are and the longer your tenure, the more rope you get before you hang yourself.
Yeah.
And Christian, you know, by that metaphor, he's giving him he's got a lot of rope, before he's going to hang himself. So I will give him the benefit of the doubt for a lot longer than I would say, for someone further down the grid.
Sure.
And I'll leave it at that.
All right. Right on.
All right. So next up on our winners list, though, is both Ferrari, Sauber, and Haas had amazing weekends. So let's talk about Ferrari first. So rounding out the podium was Charles Leclerc, who looked really, really strong most of the weekend. Although I've heard a couple people say, after the start, they hardly mentioned it. And I went back and I watched most of the Sky Sports telecast, and it was like they almost like hardly mentioned either of the Ferraris throughout the race, and then all of a sudden, lo and behold, Charles is on third step of the podium. So
Yeah.
which it just doesn't seem to. My brain has a really hard time with that. The fact that they barely mentioned Ferrari during the telecast, but
Right.
yet they finished third,
Right.
and Lewis Hamilton finishes fourth.
Fourth.
And it was a really strong fourth. In
Yeah.
the fact that he was like just a little under 10 seconds behind his teammate at the finish. Lewis had a really, really good weekend.
He did. Yeah, and he looked strong all weekend as well. He finally looks like it, but this is
finally looking comfortable.
Yeah, but the problem that I've had with this is he'll look comfortable for, say, this race, and then the next race he'll be back in 12th and 13th. So it looks good, and then something happens and he just, it's back to where they were before. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I guess I'm keeping I'm a little bit apprehensive that he's back where he should be. As we're talking, I looked up so Charles Leclerc was about 20 seconds off pace of Norris, and Hamilton was about almost 30 seconds off. So while it's third and fourth, they were light years away from McLaren. I mean, it was like a completely different race, So it's great to see them that far up, but there's a lot more work that they have to do if they want to be at the winning races, which is where Lewis really wants to be. Fourth place for him is not what he wants. He wants to be up there first and second, so hopefully they'll get there. Again, like you were saying, I think this race really proves that the car is getting better, at least. So maybe the investments that they're making there, because the drivers haven't changed. Their strategy is still their strategy. One thing that I would like to point out too is, again, we're seeing more lack of communication by his engineer, by Lewis's engineer. Lewis is still asking for information. I mean, we're almost halfway through, and you still don't know how to communicate to your driver, dude. It's time to go grab a few beers, sit down together, and hang out. Whatever it takes. It's crazy to me that you don't know what your driver needs as far as to win a race. It's crazy.
I can't even formulate a thought around it right now because you're right that it's so inexcusable. But like I said, I have a sneaking suspicion if things don't really turn around, especially after this weekend, because Silverstone is a home race for Lewis. He's going to want, he's the winningest driver in Silverstone history. He's going to want to do well this weekend. And if things don't go right, or if there is more of this drama between him and his engineer we might start seeing rumblings about a possible change at the engineering seat for Lewis. And,
Yeah.
which, I totally, I totally think that, I think it needs to happen personally. I tried to give him the benefit of the
Yeah, you did.
doubt, up until, but after, especially after last weekend, I just think that maybe it's time
Uh,
he needs to find,
we've talked about
maybe,
this before. I
yeah,
thought maybe 4 or 5 races ago he needed to be replaced.
yeah,
It's
I know you did.
inexcusable.
And we talked about it at
Yeah.
length. But now
Yep.
I think it's time that Ferrari took some of that massive pool of money that they have and go
Absolutely.
throw it at go to the Mercedes, knock on the door and say, "Hey, can we buy Bono from you?"
Pretty please. That would be awesome.
That would be awesome. Very much so. All right, so so getting on to some more of the winners, though, what was really impressive though was this weekend was Sauber. First of all, Nico Hulkenberg takes and has a absolutely, as bad as we talked about Yuki's qualifying, Hulkenberg had an even worse qualifying. He ends up qualifying 20th, dead last on the grid. Um, but the thing is though, is that he takes and he drives an absolutely brilliant race, carves his way through the field, and ends up coming home in ninth place for some well-earned points.
Yes.
And then on top of that, to make the weekend even better for Sauber, Gabriel Bortoleto makes it into Q3 for the very first time, ends up starting in eighth place and ends up finishing in eighth place. But he was battling very hard at the end with Fernando and was trying really hard to get around his manager and could have possibly have come home in seventh place. So it was
No.
just
No, no,
an
no.
incredible weekend for Sauber. And I think we're starting to really see the input and the technical knowledge transfer that we're seeing from Audi to Sauber is starting to pay dividends, I
Yeah.
think.
Agreed. One thing I will disagree though is he was not getting around Alonso. Not going to happen.
No, not unless Alonso made a very, it's very, very rare that Alonso ever makes a mistake.
Right.
And that was going to be about the only way that Bortoleto at this
There's
point in his
no way.
career was
He
going to get
tried.
around Fernando.
To give Bortoleto credit, he did try, but come on.
Yeah.
You're
No,
not getting around Alonso.
No, he threw
Good luck,
everything
bud.
at him that he could. And
Yeah.
Sauber even took and went to McLaren and said, "Hey, don't lap Bortoleto. If you can, stay back behind him, so let him continue, because it's like as soon as, Lando went past Bortoleto and split the two, that kind of ended the fight right there."
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was still entertaining as hell to watch. Yeah. It was still so much fun to watch. And like I mentioned, Fernando is Bortoleto's manager. He's underneath the same management company that's, that Alonso is one of the owners of. And I thought it was so cool at the end of the race when Alonso actually climbed out of the car and went over and waited for Bortoleto to climb out of the car so that he could give him just the biggest hug. And I thought it was so freaking cool. It was one of those moments in motorsports that you just absolutely love.
Right. And I know we don't have this in the show notes, but a big shout out to Alonso claiming 7th and Aston Martin when his teammate claimed 14th. So great points on him and a fantastic driving yet again by Alonso.
Yes, absolutely. So, also along with Sauber's incredible run this weekend, we also had a really good run from Haas as well, which was really shocking because Esteban Ocon only qualified 17th and Ollie Bierman only qualified 15th, but yet Ocon comes home in 10th place, gets a much needed point for Haas, and Oliver Bierman was right there nipping at his heels for part of the race, and came home a really solid 11th. And it was, it was a really, really good race for Haas. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of a bounce back. They'd gone through a couple of races where, they were kind of looking, a little shaky, and now they looked absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah. With that point, they actually climb over Aston Martin. So
Yes.
Aston's at 8th place, and now Haas is at 7th place.
Yeah.
But they're neck and
Exactly.
neck with
Yeah.
Kick Sauber as well. So
Yeah.
Alpine is much further
Absolutely.
down.
Yeah, so we've got a really interesting
Yep.
fight that's brewing in the towards the back of the midfield,
Yeah.
and all of them trying to claw their way up, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Get your popcorn ready, people.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, all right, so we had the other really big loser this weekend,
Oh,
unfortunately, was
yeah.
the Williams team. Signs
Heartbreak.
again had another horrible qualifying. He ends up getting bounced for the second weekend, or the third weekend in a row. He gets bounced out of qualifying in Q1. Then his car stalls on the grid. He finally gets it going. He pulls it into the pit lane to take the start, so he's already well past the Williams pit box and the garage area, and his rear brakes light up like the 4th of July. They're burning like crazy, and they finally wheel him back to the garage and everything. And they're still, before they can even put him into the garage, they're still standing out there having to take and spray down the rear brakes because of the fire and everything. So just complete chaos for Signs. And then on top of that, Albon ends up going out of the race as well. So a double DNF for Williams. So it
Yeah.
was just really an awful weekend for all of the promise that we saw at the
Hmm.
beginning of the season. Now we're seeing it go in completely the
Yeah.
opposite direction for Williams, which is just really, really unfortunate.
Yeah, it's a heartbreak because they're up there in the constructors with 55 points, and the next
Mm-hmm.
closest is 36 points or so. Uh, they have to improve if they want to keep their spot. They're at the top of the midfield right now. If
Yes.
they have any more slip ups like this, they're gonna start tumbling pretty quickly, especially with the other teams really advancing. One
Yeah,
thing I wanted to
absolutely.
ask you about, we don't have this in the show notes, but one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, what do you think about Carlos Sainz? I mean, he's looking good sometimes, and then he's not looking good sometimes. But I mean, is it really the car, do you think? Because this last race, he kept complaining about the car, saying there's something wrong, there's something wrong. And then lo and behold, he gets DNF'd out
Yeah.
because of the
No, I
car, not because of
definitely
him.
Yes, no, I definitely think it's the car. I
Yeah.
definitely think that, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, that when Williams announced that other than a few other than a few minor upgrades that were already in the pipeline, uh, pre-Barcelona, that they were basically stopping all work on this year's car and focusing on next year's car. But the only problem is, though, is that I think that maybe some of the gremlins that we saw, especially at the end of last season, some of those gremlins are starting to rear their head again. And that I think that they're going to have to put at least a little bit of focus back into this year's car, just in order to maintain their position at the top of the midfield for the remaining races, if they want to finish it in that position. But a double DNF, is not going to get you there. And so they're
Yeah.
going to have to and they're going to have to set up their priorities and say, okay, which is more important, winning, coming home in 5th place, for next year, or do we allow ourselves to slip back so that we can continue to put all of our efforts into next year's car?
Yeah.
So you know, James and Val's and the rest of the team have some tough not tough breaks, but some tough decisions to make. And I think Val's at the helm. I think they've got the best, absolutely the best possible person that they could running the show. He's going to make the right decisions, and it's just a matter of what decision does he make.
Right.
And we'll definitely know it within the next couple races. Because I really don't think it's a problem with Signs. I really do think that it's a problem with the car right now,
Yeah.
and they just need to decide what they're going to do.
I completely agree. Yeah.
All right, then. And then the last item that we have here on the show notes is, we already talked about Aston Martin. Again, Stroll's bringing up the rear. It's at what point do we finally start to see him start to be pushed out? We've discussed this at length. I don't know that we really need to beat it anymore right now. Maybe by the
Agreed.
time we get to the summer break, we can take a little time to beat that dead horse again a little more. But the other thing too, though, that was really great though was that Fernando had, it was another points paying weekend. What is it? It's either the third or fourth weekend in a row that he's now scored points. I think it's the third weekend in a row that he's scored points, and he is now on level with Stroll. So that right there, in and of itself, I think is telling enough that now that he's finally scoring points and the car is he's finally gotten a handle on the car. That as long as the car continues to improve, we're going to still continue to see improved form from Fernando. But then also, we had a kind of a so-so weekend for Racing Bulls in the fact that Liam Lawson in a Racing Bulls actually out-qualified Max Verstappen. Now, admittedly, like I said, we had that late yellow flag in Q3 that he was, Max was on a lap that would have put him ahead of Liam and probably in front of George. But, but in all intents, but for, the way things worked out, Liam actually ends up out-qualifying Max Verstappen in what, by all measures is an inferior car. And he ends up holding place and finishing in sixth place. So for Liam, it was a really good weekend. Now, Isaac, not as much. I mean, he was outside of the points, but, he definitely, he improved one place over his qualifying run. So not by all measures, not a great weekend for Hodger, but I don't know. It's just, he just had a bad weekend. Let's move on to Silverstone.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's get into a couple of news items. So first of all, Toto Wolff, head of Mercedes, is still stirring the pot, still trying to make enough noise that's saying that Max is coming to Mercedes for next season. But Horner's come out and said unequivocally, no, Max is going to be at Red Bull again next season. I talked about it last week that, and you and I have both talked about, how we think that Max leaving Red Bull is a bad idea. So at this point, who do you believe? Do you believe Toto or do you believe Horner?
100% Toto. I don't believe Horner at all. And
Really?
not because I think that Horner needs to leave, because I do. But I really think that Max is fed up. You can hear it in his voice when he talks about the car, and this is beyond his normal, this car isn't working, blah, 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 whatever. You can sense, and maybe I'm just reading more into it than I should be, but it seems like to me that there's a lot of frustration that is not really being vented on radio, but you can tell, or at least I hear more in his voice, more frustration than I have ever in the past. So I don't know. I truly believe that Toto wants Max. Obviously he's made no secret of that at all. And I definitely believe Toto is pulling all that he can in order to get Max over. So the courtship's definitely there. So I would definitely believe more on, because who stands to lose more, Toto or Horner? Well, Horner does, because now you no longer have your chief aerodynamicist. He's gone. You have lost a lot of your engineering. And now you're talking about the only driver in the world possibly that can drive that shit box.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
What do you do now? You're not going to attract the top. You might get like a Sainz, right? Because he wants to get back to the top of the grid. But I would caution Carlos on that move. It sounds attractive, but it's like one of those things that, you go work for a company because, you hear about all the perks and you look at how much they're going to pay you. And then you realize, oh, wait, I don't have a life anymore.
Yeah.
And I mean, look at the past of Red Bull. How many careers have they killed because of the car?
There's a lot.
That is not a team that I would join at this point. anyway, what are your thoughts?
No, I totally agree that I'm at this point, I'm not sure who to believe, to be perfectly honest with
Yeah.
you, because there are so many rumors swirling around that until something is official, I mean, I can express my opinion. I can express that I think, as we've already stated, I think that by him saying Max going to Mercedes is a mistake, no matter what Wolf dangles in front of him. I think Toto would be much better served from a team's perspective, from a continuity perspective, and from a the upside to a Russell and Antonelli pairing going forward into the new regulations. I think would serve Toto much better than bringing over Max and losing one of those top line drivers. I think
Yeah.
it would be a total mistake. But
Yeah,
we'll see what happens. We're going to see how this all shakes
yeah.
out.
Yeah, I would be more worried about Max's career because, as we've talked about, that car is designed around Max. Now, again, we don't have the same engineers and designers around that car anymore. So we're starting to see where he being Max is not able to take as much efficiency out of that car as what we've seen in the past. So maybe Max is also seeing that as well, saying, okay, well, I don't have that team here. I need to go somewhere else that possibly that they do. So I could definitely see Max wanting that. We'll see. I think that definitely it's I don't know. If I were a betting man, I would say that he's in that seat, in the Mercedes seat 2026. I'll go ahead and put it on.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's a bold prediction, my friend. So, but I like it. I like it a lot. So, because that's what we are all about here, is the bold predictions and the oddball, insights.
Yeah, right on.
All right. So last item. First of all, Corey and I have released our review of F1 the movie, the latest Brad Pitt, Jerry Bruckheimer juggernaut. But if you haven't listened to that episode, go listen to it right now. Pause this one, go listen to it, and then come back and finish up with us. But the F1 movie had a really strong opening weekend. It topped the box office charts, raked in over $140 million just here in the US alone. So I would say that we've got a hit on our hands, wouldn't you?
I definitely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And not to spoil anything, if you haven't already listened to our review of the movie, both Corey and I really liked it. We had a few things that we nitpicked about it, being much more knowledgeable fans and not as much of a casual fan. There was a few things that kind of bothered us and everything, but all in all, a really great movie. If you haven't already seen it, before you go listen to our review, go watch the movie, then listen to our review, then come back and finish up this episode. All right. So I think we're done.
Yeah, I think we're ready.
Okay, then. So I'm going to read us out now. So with that, the track is cold. The cars are in the transport and on their way back to home base. Join Corey and I next week when we will have a recap of all the action from the birthplace of F1, also known as Silverstone. So until next time, he's Corey. I'm Scott. We are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.